Hey folks, welcome back to the podcast. If you've been listening for the past few weeks, you have probably caught Jeff talking about his brand new book, which is entitled Human Still Required. He's been on the road, I've been on the road, and we have been so desperate to have a conversation about the book. I loved it. I was so excited when I received my copy. And we thought, you know what? We're not going to let time zones and travel get in the way of us recording an episode about this. So we decided to get creative, as we love to do at Shifting Schools, and Jeff and I exchanged a few voice memos about his new phenomenal book. So this episode brings you that conversation, a way that we, again, just wanted to chat about the book, the rationale behind it, a little bit about the process. And I want to remind you, listener, if you would like to try the first chapter of Jeff's book free, head on over to the show notes. He's made sure that all of the listeners can check out chapter 1 on the house. Okay, without further ado, here's Jeff and I swapping some voice memos. Hey Jeff, so Human Still Required, when I finished reading it, one of the first things that really stood out to me was just how practical this book is and how aware the book is that when it comes to leadership right now, in these times with AI, we have a lot of fear to contend with, which, you know, anytime we experience change is scary, but I really appreciated how the book kind of very quickly gets the reader into the perspective of here's what we can do, here's a perspective, here's a way that we can think about moving forward. And that just really resonated with me, how quickly you bring the reader to here's what we can do.
Hey, Trisha. Yeah, thanks for that. I think my goal with, especially at the beginning of the book, was to try and tackle this idea of fear straight on. You know, over the last 3 years, having worked with countless leaders across the educational spectrum, from superintendents to school boards to teacher leaders in the classroom, and and just educators in general, is trying to get to this idea that this is a moment, but it's not a moment to be scared of. I think one of my favorite parts of the book is at the very beginning of chapter 1, where I say, I heard over and over, AI is going to break school. And it's not. AI is not going to break school. It's going to change school. And what we're having to do is we're having to think about how is it going to change school. But it's not the first technology to do this. Every technology that has come into our lives has changed school in some way. Trisha, you and I are both of an age where we remember the TV being rolled into our classroom to watch VSH tapes or live television. I remember watching the Challenger blow up live on TV in 4th grade. It still stuck with me. But that technology, just televisions in the classroom, changed. Overhead projector changed our classrooms. You talk about what the internet did. We've gone through these changes before. AI is a change, but it is a change that we can lead through. And the whole idea and my hope for the book and for the reader is understanding that this is a change. It is going to change education like every technology has, but it's not something to be afraid of. It's something to embrace, and it's something to be thinking about. This next generation is lucky enough to grow up in an age with AI. We were lucky enough to grow up with an age with television and DVDs and overhead projectors, and the generation before us grew up with calculators. Like, it's just this idea that this technology is going to be any different than the others, I don't think is the mindset. I think it's how do we lead in a time of uncertainty? And we have been here before. And the more conversations I'm having with leaders, the more we're getting around to this understanding that this is a leadership moment. And how do we lead through this change with integrity and making sure that we, the human, are still at the center of all of the decisions we make?
So, Jeff, I have to say, I really, really appreciate you highlighting the opportunity, actually, this is for us to think about who are the kinds of leaders we actually want to be. And I feel like a corresponding signal about what your book does to sort of say, like, hey, wait a second, let's actually pause and think about how we want to lead, what leadership looks like in this moment. I have heard from so many friends who have loved the Jacinda Ardern book, A Different Kind of Power. We both have a common friend, Chrissy from New Zealand. So I have really enjoyed reading that book. But I think part of that book's popularity is Jacinda Ardern talking about we can be thinking about leading people in a different way. So I feel like there's almost this this current or this energy that is saying, let's, maybe let's think about what leadership can be and how we approach it. And your book, again, really, I think does a great job of saying AI is a really great inflection point for leaders to think about how do we navigate forward? What are the human skills actually that I really, really, really want to underscore in this moment? What are the human skills that faculty are going to need to lean into? And that's just, it's so ironic. And I know you and I have had so many conversations about this that while we're talking so much about AI, at the same time, underneath that, we are also in parallel talking about human skills, so-called soft skills. So I think also, I think your book is really going to resonate with people who are saying, I want to think much more intentionally about what it means to lead well.
Yeah, I agree. I think this idea of being able to think about what does it mean to lead through an era of innovation. And one of the things that I really liked putting this book together was this idea of when we are going through an innovative stage, like we are now with AI, leaders, and a leader being a leader of a classroom, a teacher or a principal or a superintendent or a school board member, tends to want to control things. When innovation hits us, like AI has, the knee-jerk reaction, which I don't think it's anybody's fault, I think it's a human reaction, is to have more control. That is where we saw with AI, for example, all of a sudden we wanted to have AI detectors so we could control what students were doing. We wanted to put guardrails in place so we could control what teachers were doing. We wanted to put policies in place. We didn't want to do anything. We go to this idea of control. The problem is, as a leader, when you try to control innovation, all you do is you push people underground. People will innovate around the control, and you end up not controlling anything. And that's what we saw and what has happened with AI. As soon as AI detectors came out, kids started figuring out how do you get around the AI detectors. And next thing you know, the more control you try to have over people during an era of innovation, the actual more chaos it creates. So one of the things that we talk about in the book is this idea of you don't want to have control, you want to talk about judgment. And how do we allow people to create judgment in their use of tools? And how do you lead those conversations, which is really what is needed? It really comes down to, are we having conversations with students? Are we having conversations with teachers? And if we're not having those conversations and we're relying on control, we find ourselves in a state of chaos. But if we actually lean into this idea of, well, let's have conversations. Let's talk about the human things that we know to be true. The idea about making a good judgment, making decisions, analyzing results. These are human skills that we can lean on that during a era of innovation is a way better way to lead than trying to control everything. You can't control something that is moving this fast, and we never have through an era of innovation. We've seen this happen again and again and again. And so in the book, I really try to hit home this idea of you can't control every aspect of it, but instead, as a leader, you have to have these conversations. And there's all these kind of conversations you can have that I talk about in the book, but that's really what it comes down to. And we see it, and we're starting to come out of that, I believe, right now, which is why I think this book is timely, is to support leaders to say, okay, we're not going to control this thing. We know we need to teach kids how to use it. We know we need to give professional development to our teachers. How do we start having judgment and conversations around the tool instead of just trying to control the outcomes?
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Jeff. And I think the other piece, you mentioned so many things that are just like, it's human nature. Of course, when we're scared, when there's change, we're going to lean into trying to find control. But there's also what I think is the human nature piece of we learn through play. We like to be creative. And I'm wondering if we can turn to kind of the behind the scenes, because I remember when you first got started on this book, how excited you were. And I'm wondering if you can just take listeners back to that moment in time. What did it look like for Jeff to be just like so in creative mode? The process, I think, is something that people are going to be interested in. And why did you feel so creative? You were so fired up. You were so excited about working on this book. I know that you literally lost sleep over it. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the process for writing the book is pretty crazy. And I'm still reflecting on how it all came to be. I think what I've been telling people is I basically got bullied into writing the book by ChatGPT. And I talk about the process in the book. I'm fully transparent in the book that I used AI to support me in writing it. And the other thing that I reflect on is, being dyslexic, I never would have written the book. I just wouldn't have. And to me, that's the power of AI. In the book, I talk about how do we allow AI to do the busy work. And one of the things I want people to lean into is this idea of busy work is different for all of us. I'm a presenter. I keynote. I consult. That is my passion. That's what I do. I'm not a writer. Being dyslexic, writing is the last thing I want to do. So to have an assistant who does that really well is a game changer for me. So the story behind how I got started is I was making dinner one night. And as I was making dinner here in our house, I literally opened up ChatGPT and I asked ChatGPT, if I was going to write a book, what should that book be? And ChatGPT wrote back, and if anybody that's used ChatGPT, you know exactly where this comes from. But ChatGPT comes back and says, I was wondering when you were going to ask me that. And then outlines for me 3 different books based on all of my usage of AI, of ChatGPT since back in 2023, outlines 3 books that I can write. And I looked at them and I was like, holy cow, I could write all 3 of those books. I know of those 3 books. I know the outlines to those books. How does this know me so much? How does my assistant know me so well that it can give me the outline for the book? And one of the books was titled Human Still Required. And as soon as I read that, I was floored. And I was just like, that is such a great title, to the point where I thought ChatGPT made it up. And so I went searching, and I searched for 3 days all over the internet, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, trying to find a book titled Human Still Required. And when I couldn't find it, that was it. So I went back to ChatGPT and I asked it, how would I set this up so that you can co-write this with me and we can be co-writers in this? Do I set up a custom GPT or do I use a project? So if you pay $20 a month for ChatGPT, you get these projects, which I've been using more and more to do incredible stuff for my own workflow. And ChatGPT said, well, it's way better as a project, and here's why. And it outlines why. And I'm like, great. What do you need to get this started? And it said, well, we're going to need an outline for the book. So over the course of about 4 hours, ChatGPT and I go through and we get a great outline for a book. So I upload that into the project. We then put all these guardrails in place around how it's going to be formatted and how do we want the talk to be and what are the kind of layout. And if you get the book, and I hope you do, if you get the book, it reads like a keynote, and that's really what I wanted. I'm a consultant. I give keynotes. I love giving keynotes. The book reads as if you're in a keynote. It's almost structured in the sense of you're with me on slides. And I love the way that turned out. That's probably one of the things I love most about the book is it is 100% me. And even my wife, it blows my wife away. She said, this is so you. This is how you talk. These are the ways you make points. So I set up this structure, and it took about, I think, 8 different PDFs that I created with ChatGPT to set up the project. I then decided to go back in, and it needed my information. And this is one of those cool things about AI that I love. I went back through the thousands of presentations that I've given over the last 3 years, and I chose ones that I thought fed into the book. I downloaded them as PDFs and I uploaded them. It ended up being about 54 different presentations. I have written 3 articles for school board members, for principal magazines. I took those articles, I put them in there. Trisha, you and I have done podcasts based on these topics around AI and leadership. I took the transcripts of those podcast episodes, turned them into PDFs, and uploaded that in there. I basically gave it all of this data that is mine. This is me spread across multiple different formats. And that's where the book came from. And to me, there's so much power in thinking about that. This is my stuff spread across presentations and podcasts and articles and everything else I've done for the last 3 years thinking about this. And my assistant was able to compile all of that and then turn it into something that I am just floored by.
Well, listener, I'm guessing you are floored by that too. So don't delay. Head over to the show notes and learn more about getting your first free chapter of Human Still Required. Congratulations, Jeff, on the latest, but perhaps not yet, your greatest book.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.